There's a hush in the hall where the medals used to glimmer short line. Trumpet curls like a question in a glass of cheap red wine. Slow and dim, short line. Bass walks soft like a sneaking out past.
My guest today has spent 20 years asking the questions that make powerful people uncomfortable. I'm Chris LaBossiere. This is Barney's Tavern, conversations with interesting Canadians doing interesting things. Pull up a chair. Vassy, welcome.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, thank you, and I'm going to try to do my best with probably the best journalist and anchor in the country who does ask the toughest questions. I'm not even going to try to compete with any of that. So hopefully we just have a chance to have a conversation. So let's Swift Current, Saskatchewan. You chose that. Nobody ends up in Swift Current by accident, as far as I know. And what, tell me about that.
Yeah, I chose it through great fortune, I would say now looking back on it. But I basically had started, like, my only journalism experience was this post-grad program, because I had gone through my undergrad and master's and sort of decided at the end of that this is something I wanted to kind of take a leap and try. And I knew I wanted to do TV journalism because I consumed a lot of it growing up. And I did this post-grad program that was like 4 months, all day, every day for 5 days a week. At a college, teaching you how to be on air, how to video, and during the course, the teachers constantly said, like, you just can't walk into a big market. You can't just go on TV and breakfast television in Toronto here. Like, you need to go somewhere and learn the craft of doing this. And I took them literally. And so I made 2 applications toward the end of that program. There was a job opening in Swift Current and a job opening in Prince Rupert, I believe. And Swift Current replied first. And I did like an over the phone interview. Like, there wasn't even FaceTime or anything then. And I got the job, and I literally packed up with my sister and we flew to Calgary, I think. And then we were going to fly to Regina and drive from there. And she had like something happened to her ear. So we couldn't, so we had to take a bus and arrive in Swift Current at like 3 a.m. with all of my life's belongings. And that sort of was the beginning of everything. So I ended up being there for about a year, and it was my first job. And it was one of those like all encompassing, you shoot, you edit, you do. I did 6 stories a week for this sort of like independent news thing that also aired on the public television. And it was like the biggest learning curve ever. And I'm so fortunate that, I look back on it I didn't feel it at the time, but I look back on it with great fondness.
What did Swift Current teach you that Ottawa, where you are now as an example, never could have? Curious.
Oh, everything. Humility, first of all. So I had, like I said, I had my master's, and you kind of think you're hot stuff in a way, right? Like I am an expert in something. Like, it was absolutely ridiculous that I thought I could bring anything to the table there compared to what experience gives you in this industry, in its profession more largely. And so I think, right away I was doing stories like, how long is this crosswalk? Is it too long for the seniors? And steak sizzler luncheons and the Blueberry Festival. And I just really was brought back down to earth in a way that apparently I needed it to be. And it made me appreciate that actually what people make look easy in this business is anything but. And it's instead the product of like learning how to, in that case, I was a reporter, so I had to learn how to write, how to put together clips, how to pick good clips, how to do interviews, how to like multitask all that stuff and make it make sense for a wide audience and condense a lot of knowledge into a small amount of time. Like, so many different things that I just took for granted, I think. So it taught me like what was necessary to actually like become a reporter. It taught me a lot of humility. And then more broadly, it exposed me as someone who grew up ignorant in the middle of downtown Toronto to what people in rural Canada think about. And that's not a generalization. It obviously depends on a lot of things. But people who live in smaller places, in rural places, in Western Canada, all things that had I just gone from Toronto to Ottawa, I would have probably remained ignorant of for years and years. And ultimately, all these years later, I think greatly informed the approach I take to a whole myriad of subjects and interview subjects.
the idea of moving even just to get a job, and particularly as it's your first job. And I in my previous career, I probably moved 9 times because that was that's just essentially how you rose through the ranks. And it doesn't feel that people are willing to do that today. Like I think it's something from the past. You'd have to go and do your time, as you say,
Yeah.
right? And many industries like banking, and I remember my uncle, he'd move from bank to bank to bank to branch, and they weren't allowed to stay at one for too long and all that. So kudos for you. And I would agree, like, we have a farm in southern Saskatchewan, just very close to the U.S. border, near what's called the Big Muddy Valley. And
Mhm.
it's a different world. The
Yeah.
the perspectives, the people, the culture, and how people interact with each other, and just a real amount of sincerity and honesty that you don't interact with normally, and it feels strange for a while. We go down there, and we're there for a week, and it's a very, very, very unique part of the Canadian identity. I think our rural places, and particularly the prairies. And well, kudos for you. To go through your career, one thing that I'd love to understand is, just as a layperson who doesn't understand your industry perfectly, but so you start as a reporter in
Mhm.
Swift Current, and then you become a journalist, and then you become an anchor, but you're still a journalist throughout all that, right? But what's the progression of your career in your space?
So it really depends on everybody, and I don't, all I knew going into it was, and sounds so obnoxious and nerdy, but like I wanted to host a Sunday political show, and I knew that from the minute I decided to go into journalism largely. Like I watched I watched the American Sunday shows, I watched Question Period with my mom and dad. We were all super politically, like, I just grew up like that. I don't know how else to explain it, and I was naive to even articulate that, I guess, at some points, or to think it so specifically, or whatever it was. But I knew it was my objective. Not to say I knew it would happen for sure, or that it would happen in a certain amount of time. I didn't care if it took 30 years, but I had that kind of crystal clear, like, this is my objective. And then I could govern myself kind of accordingly along the way. And by that, I mean, I knew I had to pay my dues, A, in a smaller market, but B, also what we call covering general assignment. So
Mm.
most people who are on air start off as reporters. And when I started getting into reporting, it's like, it is in and of itself like an amazing, amazing job. And to get good at it takes like 10 or 15 years. Like the best of the best, my God, it's a craft. Like it doesn't look that way sometimes because they make it look so easy, but like it is, from the writing to the composition of the pieces that air to the questions that you ask, all that kind of stuff. It's like its own skill set. So once I kind of got into that in Swift Current, and then I was in Saskatoon and Edmonton, I was covering general stuff. I was learning how to go live. All of these are like different types of skills that you get over time, depending on the size of the market. And particularly when I hit Edmonton, like when I was at Global Edmonton there, it was a beast. Like it was 11 and a half hours of live news a day and live trucks everywhere. And I was able to sort of be live all the time, to compose stories. And because I had articulated what my end goal is to my boss there, like eventually, not too long after that, I was like a night beat reporter there covering a mat leave. He's like, okay, we're going to have an opening covering politics. And he knew I was a reporter to cover politics exclusively. Like that was my goal. And I'll do whatever it takes and throw myself into whatever happens before that. But that was my goal. And so finally the ledge reporter position opened there. And that was it. Like one day on the job, the first day on the job was Ed Stelmach's resignation. No joke. I'm in he announces his resignation. I'm chasing Raj Sherman around the side. Like I remember like it was yesterday. And I was like, that day, I was like, that's it. I'm done. Like I know that what I thought I wanted was exactly what I do want. And
Is it the truth seeking? Is it the accountability journalism?
it's the
Is
front row
it
seat to it's all of that, but it's the
it's
front row seat to history.
Well, you certainly
It,
did that yesterday. I said again, we were talking, we joined in terms of your opportunity to looks like moderate a panel with our Prime Minister and I think he's the President of Finland. I'm not
He's the
sure that's his
president of Finland. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you've obviously reached the very, very top of your industry as well. So so I guess I got to know you as you were in Edmonton, as a personality in Edmonton, so in some of my preparation for the conversation. I was reminded of one of your stories, and that's the Alison Redford severance story. You broke
Right.
that story. Someone's career ended. Since I know that someone fairly well, and you probably do
I
too,
do too. No one
maybe
like him well. Yeah.
we're talking about Stephen Carter, and he he's texting everyone and trying to get to take over the Liberal Party as we speak out here, like for some advertising strategy. So he's a fascinating guy, but it was a big story. You broke it. He lost his job. What does that feel like the morning the story runs? Something like that.
So that experience was definitely the first time I broke a big story. And there's a sort of now I look back and I recognize all of the things associated with it. And it was one of those stories. It was actually Edmonton was such a unique experience because I was able to Global had a massive audience at 6 o'clock at night, and people of all ages tuned in there. And it allowed me, like, I was able to benefit hugely from that because I would be on every single night at 6 reporting on what happened in the legislature. And so people very quickly became like, oh, I could talk to Herb if I have a tip or whatever. And I was inundated with like literally brown envelopes. So somebody sent me documents, essentially, I think if I recall correctly, like with documentation showing the story of this severance. And like, I'm still pretty green. I don't know, I know I have to confirm it. I know the basics of this stuff, but like, I'm kind of on my own trying to figure out how I go about that. And I can't remember, to be honest, exactly how I did, but I was able to enough. And, you want to throw up the entire time, basically, because you're always worried, what if I'm wrong? What if I'm, it's a feeling you grow accustomed to the more you do it. But obviously at that point I wasn't. And now I look at it and it was just a very straightforward story, right? Like I probably wouldn't even have had, I don't know if it would have the same impact now. It was a very different time. There was a lot of scrutiny on the Redford government and sort of a lot of different things, right? The context was sort of unique. Like, of course someone gets a severance right. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
yeah. As an executive, particularly, as you know
right?
how
Of
executive
course.
employment agreements are structured, there's usually some form of guarantee there. And
I think they had,
but it also just feels like angel activity versus what we're seeing in the world today. Like, I mean,
there's no comparison. Like now it wouldn't even
just
register.
Blatant. Obviously America has a world record holder, I think, for kleptocracy with President Trump. But the things that rattle people, meaning the public and the citizen, I think we just get it. We've just have too much to process, so it's hard to rank what's really bad and what's really good.
Yeah, it's a totally different environment. And I would say at that time, like, there's a big focus in Alberta. Like, we were, nearing the end of a 40-year dynasty, right? And so there was a huge amount of people in the bureaucracy who were witnessing what they viewed as abuse of taxpayer money, levels of, corruption of some sort. Like, which happens. Like, this isn't necessarily ascribed to just one party. Imagine another party in the country at 40 years in power, like what kind of stuff would be unearthed. So there was like a heightened level of scrutiny on everything.
I need to remind you that I ran in 2015 on that 43rd year, and luckily, and I'm very thankful for, I didn't win that election, and I didn't have to become a politician. But I can recall. I'm an industry person, an entrepreneur, and a business owner, and so I really technically haven't had a boss other than my board and our shareholders for very long time, and then to march into the culture of the party, and I remember particularly the candidate preparation at the Red Deer College, and so all the candidates and the infrastructure people, and obviously the campaign people were there, and my number one memory that immediately told me I was making a huge mistake and I was stuck in this process already was, but the strategist, and I won't say his name, was explaining. There's a little classroom for the new candidates, people that have never run for office before, and so and basically the instructions were, you're not going to talk to the media, don't tell anybody anything, don't do any debates, don't say anything. So, for me personally, that was antithetical to what I believe, good governance includes. But it's fascinating. It's
rampant now. It's rampant now. You won't find many debates where locally every candidate shows up.
It's funny, and obviously you have probably the world's best seat for this, but like I really would love to get your perspective on the media savviness of Prime Minister Carney.
Of him specifically?
Yeah, like what we've learned about him since we've got to know him as a politician.
Oh, that's an interesting question. I guess there's a couple of different ways to look at it. So I've only done one interview since he became prime minister with him, and it was right after his cabinet was sworn in. I'll tell you an interesting kind of funny story, a backstory about that. Basically, during the leadership, um, so I used to have him on question period before he was a politician, and everybody thought he
Of
might
course.
run or whatever. But as former Bank of Canada governor, just as I have Mr. Polas on all the time, right? Like, there are interesting people to interview about the moment we find ourselves in economically, and certainly he was active within the Liberal Party, and it was always a chance to say, "Hey, are you going to run?" And so I had communicated with him in that respect before, and then obviously since he had decided to run, I didn't even think to. So I was anxious to get an interview with him, and I had his cell phone, so I called him, and he didn't answer, and so I sent him a text message, and I said, I kind of made a joke, like, because he had gone on with Jon Stewart, and I was like, I know my hair isn't quite as great as Jon Stewart, but I too have read your book. And I too would like to interview you, as would Canadian journalists. Like, hey, Canada's still over here. Like, I said it lightheartedly. And then he did call me. And essentially, in that conversation, I sort of took a leap, and I don't know if the right word is bartered. That sounds crass. It wasn't crass, but said, I'd like the first interview if you are successful. And he said, okay.
Oh,
And
wow. Good for you for asking it. That's
well,
great.
you gotta take it while you can, kind of thing. You take your chances. That's the one thing in this business for sure. Can't be afraid of anything. And so then I sort of let it go on and thought, oh my God, like, I don't know this person well enough if I can trust their word or anything like that. And then basically we reached out again right after, and we're like, hey, remember when you told Vassy and blah blah blah, and we got the interview, and he kept his word. And so that's how we ended up with the first interview, Canadian TV interview he did after he became prime minister, which is kind of crazy.
He seems to have this ability to kind of shed the partisanship in the moment and transcend it somehow, like kind of an apolitical force when he's at a micropodium or when people are, he really is an interesting person, and I wonder, how much the experience he has in the other roles he's had has obviously probably prepared him for this opportunity. But it's been fascinating to watch. I'm curious when you moved to the anchor chair. Which is quite different. What did you give up and what did you gain?
So it was sort of an easy transition, like, not easy is the wrong word. It was like a multi-pronged transition, in that I didn't just become an anchor after being a reporter. There was about a year to 2 years where I did both roles, because so I had worked at Global in Ottawa as a national reporter there. Jacques Bourbeau was the bureau chief, and Tom Clark was the host of the Sunday political show there. And Jacques Bourbeau left to take another job in Toronto. So then I became the bureau chief there. So I'm still reporting, but also managing the bureau. And then 6 months later, something like that, Tom Clark left to take a role in the private sector. And so then eventually that became my job as well. So that was only 1 day a week. And then the rest of the days I was reporting and sort of managing the bureau as well. And so that provided a great, I think, ground to like hone my skills while still reporting, in like take that time to get better. And then once I moved to CBC is when it became full-time hosting. And that was sort of like, bath by fire or whatever you want to call it. Like, it was a huge change, and it was a very abrupt change from reporting, a very different change of like my life, everything, and a real learning experience as well that like took me years before I felt really comfortable.
I just having to go through this process, learning how to do a podcast. It's really a personal challenge to push myself. Luckily, my producer Bryn is very experienced as a media person, and but mostly radio and audio, and for me,
He's awesome.
it's really intimidating and challenging to be on the spot where you have to produce interesting questions and content for people, and especially because in your world, I'm sure people are walking in with their talking points and they just won't deviate from them. So I wanted to ask you a question on that, like this idea of kind of unfolding or finding the truth under pressure in a moment. And this kind of came to my mind, and the thinking is, the question for you would be, is there a version of objectivity that becomes its own kind of dishonesty? Meaning, when someone's kind of lying demonstrably, like, and the format requires the platform, are you serving truth or are you undermining it? Do you think? Have you ever thought about it that way? Like, because it's getting almost feels like extreme, the ability or inability for people to answer a question.
Like, am I serving it, you mean, by...
Well, I'm just curious if that objectivity is actually serving the ultimate cause or purpose. Like,
Well,
when do you get like, listen,
I
you're
don't think
bullshitting me here, and
well, I
I
do
need
all
you
the
to.
I do all
Well,
the time. I
you do it very
just say it,
tactfully.
and yes, exactly. I think just I would say, like, don't misjudge my demeanor as undiscerning. Just because I'm not saying you're full of shit doesn't mean that I'm not conveying that through a different means. And I would say, like, objectivity is the way I characterize objectivity is not like two sidesing or both sidesing everything. It is finding the holes in the arguments that are being put forward, but finding those holes, like, based on an entire, like, library of knowledge that I have accumulated through covering this stuff for as long as I have, plus research. So, like, it's not just out of the blue, I'm just not devil's advocating everything.
Right.
I'm really, like, thinking about what is the line of accountability here that serves the interests of the people who are watching, that is really, like, based in, this is bullshit. It's not just
That-
me inventing
It's a
bullshit.
really
This
good
is
way to look at
bullshit.
it. So,
Yeah.
on behalf of your viewers, you're trying to cut to that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, very much so. And then the other thing is, like, they may come at you sort of without answering or with talking points, but I'm very used to pointing that out and following up in a way that makes it evident to the viewer that, like, I tried my best and that I'm not going to stop trying just because they aren't willing to play ball. So I think as long as I'm, like, my line of questioning is informed by reality and by research and by a whole bunch of things, and not just me, like, I'm going to play devil's advocate today, plus, like, me pointing out to the audience when someone isn't answering and following up even when it's uncomfortable for them because they haven't answered. Like, I hope in the aggregate all of that sort of does serve a purpose that isn't just platforming stuff that makes you feel depressed at the end of the day.
So, like, maybe a different way to answer that question is, like, have you ever looked at a story and thought, I got played? Like, does that ever happen to you? No. Oh, so that means that you're just pushing on this question. And obviously you can tell when you just run out of time to keep asking the same question and anchor, you have that, you've got to continue to move on. But it does seem like a bit of a rampant problem in the sense that the nature of electoral or partisan politics really means media is just being used to project to your base. That's what it seems that
I think that's a great observation. I think that's why it's harder and harder actually to do this type of journalism, because I don't think that they're using all media that way. I think there's so much more media that is not even striving for objectivity anymore, that they can easily use those mediums to do exactly that, to be unchallenged, to just get their point across. So why would you come be grilled by me for 12 to 15 minutes substantively on, like, whatever it is, the policy that you've decided is the best one to pursue, when you can just go out there and say whatever you want and someone just nods and says, like, great point. And I think that is if I were to, like, identify one of the biggest challenges moving forward, like, I don't think it's all media. I don't think like an organization like mine is being, quote unquote played. I certainly don't feel like I am. It's the problem is, that the expectation, like, politicians used to feel like we have to do things like this. We have to do accountability. We have to defend our ideas. I don't think all politicians feel that way anymore, and they can get away with not doing that.
I actually do think a lot about accountability journalism. It's kind of something I remember when blogs were a thing. I wrote a long blog post on accountability journalism, what I think would be an approach. to resolving the issue that's there, and ultimately accountability journalism is really shrinking, and particularly locally. I wanted to ask you, who benefits from that?
Well, people clearly who hold power and who want to keep on holding power. And I'm not one who likes to ascribe nefarious intent necessarily off the rip. Like, I don't know if I've met a lot of really well-meaning politicians, and I'm not really an inherent cynic at all. But I do think, like, of course, politicians want to implement their agenda unimpeded, and they want to be able to hold on to power as long as possible so that they can do that. And I don't know what it is, but I have noticed even the course of over the last 20 years that there's just a less of a expectation of themselves to defend their ideas, because that's essentially all I'm asking them to do. I don't get on and ask them, hey, did you have an affair? Did you do this in your office? Like, I'm not asking I'm literally asking about policy, and that's it. And I have this feeling like they're always looking not to, if that makes sense. Like, it's sort of, I just think that everything is easier when your ideas are untested, when you don't have to defend them voraciously. And the kind of culture of politics that we've brought in is one where that is the preference over, like, there are some politicians who love it. Do you know what I mean? Like, I still have like a handful who come in here who they love the fight. They want to defend their ideas, and that's how it should be.
Yeah, I've found it interesting, just curiously, to watch the reemergence of Jason Kenney's voice politically in Canada. That on Twitter, Twitter is the platform I use. Unfortunately, maybe too much, and I do appreciate the thoughtfulness and the dialogue that he's willing to have with people who object with his way of thinking. And honestly, having lived in Alberta as the premier, I wasn't inspired by his leadership. I would be honest. I'm trying to be non-political in this sense, because I try to ultimately support the governments that run our institutions and our, but seeing this side of him where you get more long-form feedback on how they think or what they think it's a game changer. Someone said to me today they think that politicians are going to eventually have podcasts, like for them to get their message
out. They'd love to have that. Yeah,
but is that a restriction? Did you that's interesting. I never thought of that. I didn't even respond when that person said that to me today. But
I'll say two things. I used to love interviewing Jason Kenney when he was premier of Alberta. First of all, because he would do the interviews. He would do them even when he was facing a ton of criticism, not just on days when he had things to announce. And I always sort of measure how much I enjoy interviewing people by how prepared I feel like I have to be, how much of a challenge. I know it's like I have to think of every possible thing they might answer, and I have to really think out my line of questioning and sort of what facts I'm going to use. I'm very, very meticulous about it. And I always, like, you inherently, like, in your gut, this one's like a level A, B, C. He was always one of the ones where I was like, I got to be ready. And you may disagree, and I understand completely with the ideas that he was promulgating or what he was, his policies or how he governed himself as premier or whatever. But he definitely took questions. And I probably did like at least 20 interviews with him during that time. Never once was there any sort of pushback to how, I could go as hard as I possibly could and he could take it. I think politicians would love it if they only had podcasts, if they could just get up on a microphone and tell everybody, like Gavin Newsom does, for example,
his strategy in response to dealing with Trump by re-Trumping him is
pretty funny.
Pretty ingenious. Whoever thought of it.
And I'll say, like, I have some sympathy. I'm not actually like against any of that. I just don't think that should be all you have to do. I think you should have to face accountability journalism. If you are paid by the taxpayer and you want to represent Canadians and you want to implement policies that you feel will benefit them, you should be able to defend why you think that's the case. I don't care if you also do podcasts and you also have your own vehicles. I just don't think they should supplant defending your ideas.
Well, I have a whole theory on what I think it's going to take to fix accountability journalism and in the country, but that's a long conversation, and I certainly don't want to waste any time I get the chance to talk to you. So
I'll
really
read that
love
blog.
To,
yeah.
I can't even find it anymore because that's one of my frustrations. But I am concerned about that. Like, ultimately, there's simply no economic model where it's profitable. And so to give you a sense for what I ultimately believe is, I think something like the Pew Foundation or PBS might be a different kind of example, where I think we're going to end up with what I would call like an accountability trust network, and ultimately regional editorial boards, local editorial boards. Those would be a mix of citizens and that agree to comply to certain standards, and then I think that infrastructure is funded by government, by corporations, and by the public, like through subscriptions and stuff, and then because otherwise, without that, in every community, and my gosh, the smaller the community, the worse the problem could be, and in terms of there's no economic valid reason to necessarily create and invest in investigative journalism in your small community. So I do think it's a real challenge. Misinformation seems like a whole nother challenge, and then AI seems to have aggravated that. So it must be almost impossible for you. Like, actually, one thing I'd love to ask is again, I'm a bit of a Twitter addict, but the one thing I can say about Twitter that I've always believed, and it's still true, and it's actually more true, is that I feel like I'm about 3 to 5 days ahead of my friends. Like
Oh.
the news that I consume, and I particularly am also interested in politics, macroeconomics, politics, and the kind of geopolitical reality that the country's facing and the world's facing right now. That's and on Twitter, I can go right to the battlefield. Like I've got lists I could curate to could watch activity in the Ukraine, and that's interesting to me, because I find that I'll bring a news item up to my friends that hasn't come out, and it'll take 2 or 3 days for it to come out. Like, how do you sort through that to decide, like, if you're seeing the same thing, I'm sure, on Twitter when you're there, and everybody sees it, but as a professional journalist, your responsibilities are greater, and how do you pick and choose which of those kind of things that look really fascinating that just happened 5 minutes ago? When and how is the process to get that on the nightly news? Because I really find that interesting right now.
Well, I certainly use Twitter as a news aggregator as well. We kind of call it like a wire service now. Like, it's what the wires were 15 years ago. So it's like often where you see the as you put it, like the first of a lot of stuff. And I actually find it pretty easy to discern there, because there's so many official sources of news, both from a reporter perspective, but also from an organization perspective. So I keep it pretty limited to stuff I rely on. There's a good example recently of, like, in the Terrebonne by-election, they were saying Gilles Duceppe, the former leader of the Bloc, was endorsing the Liberal leader, and like you could see there was quite a bit of movement on that, but no official sources to it, and it turned out to be fake. So like there is, I think, ways to discern even on Twitter, even though it's like so much at once.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you're astute to it,
Totally.
you can sort through and understand, and you can start to trust accounts. So that's what
Yeah,
I'll only
totally.
share in content that I think I can trust from an
Right.
account that I feel is competent. But the average person, unfortunately, may not approach it that way, and it's steering the cultural, like the outcomes that this has on society. I can't even imagine, but it feels like a transformational thing, and then AI has changed everything. So does that mean, do you have a Truth Social account? Like, does anybody
No,
have a Truth Social account?
I don't even use
Because
Twitter. Like,
I,
I just absorb it. I just use it as a news aggregator. And then I like, when you were mentioning sort of like, what's the process for figuring out like what you basically cover? It is a huge amalgamation of many different things. So it's what's, Twitter is probably the last thing I look at, only because that's something that's on all day, but I start my day very early and I consume, literally like 20 to 30 different sources of news. And I kind of give myself 30 minutes in the morning to mine. I'm like lucky I'm a speed reader, but I'm like to mine everything. And then I start being more deliberate, and I give myself another 30 minutes to fashion like a chase list, essentially. So I have a 2-hour radio show every day, and then I have a 1-hour TV show. And I structure it, and then I have the Sunday show that airs too. So I sort of structure my list in the morning to send to all the producers after doing all that. And that's the beginning of it. And then I get into work and I meet with radio first. And and then it's a combination of like, who's available? What's the subject? What else is happening later in the day? Because the thing is, you're also trying to gauge like what's the most relevant when you go to air. Because something that I feel at 5 a.m. is a big story, 90% of the time by 4:30 p.m. is not. So you constantly have to be on top of it so that you can evolve with the news cycle of the day. And then, it's radio first, then I meet with the power play team. Then I go to radio, things transform over that time too. Often like there are changes made on the fly. Then after that, I meet again with power play. Okay, where are we at based on what was the case 3 hours ago? And then we make changes again. And then we kind of keep monitoring things. And often you're doing a pre-tape or I'm studying in those 3 hours, that between 2 and 5, usually Eastern. And then at 5 o'clock, the show airs. And then you're sort of, you've got your lineup built in, but you also have to contend with, well, what if other stuff is going on? And how do you incorporate what happens live? What do you take live versus what do you monitor to turn around? Like all of those, there's like 300 decisions in an afternoon, but I'm very used to it now. So it sounds like a little bit more complex than it actually is, but you're never off. You're constantly making decisions about the question that you ask, basically, like, what is the thing that I need to put to air? And it's not a static thing. It's not like at 2 p.m. I'm like, well, I've made my choice. Often the biggest lesson I learned early on hosting the CBC show is you have to be forceful in being prepared to throw everything out when there's hardly any time. Like you can't be like at 4:30, well, the show's kind of locked in. I've only got 30 minutes. You have to be like, no, we're throwing it all out and we're doing this instead, which is like, takes some practice to feel confident in.
I'm curious, I'm just always trying to relate it to the business world that I work in and, in a kind of tech culture, entrepreneurial, um, so I know when my team has a win, we have a win, we have a good day, we win an opportunity, something like that. We can really, we can celebrate it and understand it. And I'm curious with your team, like as you guys, you're putting a show out every day, you're putting out other forms of content. What has to happen to make it feel like a win? When do you guys all high five each other and go, that was amazing?
Well, we had a great night last night. We interviewed the Finland president and we were pumped for a couple of reasons. A, that we got him. B, that we were happy with how the interview from a production perspective looked, because we had a huge amount of challenges in the room that we ended up shooting in. It took like 3 hours. Anyways, it's a very TV thing, but like it's part of it. And 3, we got news out of it and we really liked the actual content. Like we felt like it was good TV plus substantively was interesting.
So undermine or unearthing something. Sorry, that
always,
that is new.
For me, making news is like king. That news is, one of my old bosses says news is our currency, right? For all of the people who say mainstream media is dead or this is dead or this is dead, like you're still going to read breaking news and people always do. So making news, like getting news out of somebody is always something that I feel good about. And there are many nights when you don't feel good, when you're like, like the guests were better on the other network, or why couldn't we get this person, or like but I've really learned how to navigate my way through that. I don't like to lose. I'm very, very competitive. And so it's been a hard thing to get my mind around, but I've had to, because the one thing I realize is this job is very unique in that the next day you have a 100% opportunity to make right all over again. So like you're really only as good as last night or as tonight. And so if I have a bad Wednesday, part of what I think I now bring to the table, hopefully with our team and everything after all these years, is like, I'm determined the next day to bat it out of the park. And like, I'm going to be creative. You know what I mean? Like I'm never willing to lose 2 days in a row.
And so when you have to double down like that, is it energy? Is it research? Or is it confidence? Like what do you have to draw on when you need that?
I think it's like, I have a good night's sleep. I wake up in the morning, I go, okay, that one's done. Now what am I going to do to make this? And I think to myself, okay, like what are outside of the box chases, for example, that would land big? What are stories that I think I might be able to confirm that I could lead with, or that we could get the Bureau to break today? Or what are chase is a big part of what we call chase is a big part of it. Like, what's another thing that we could, like a minister we could request that maybe doesn't seem obvious, but I could get something out of that would be like, advance the narrative or advance something that people aren't thinking about. So I just start being really creative about it. And I'm at the beginning of the day, so I have time to like get my mind around all of that, and then I sort of, and by no means is this an individual endeavor, as you know, like,
Yeah.
that's sort of, somebody has to be the positive influence, and then everybody else comes along. And I work with an amazing group of young people who are unreal. And like, I mean, I have 2 producers only for the TV show, 1 producer for radio, 1.5 producers for the Sunday show, and they do a phenomenal job, absolutely phenomenal. They are the heart of it all, and they come with me 100% in anything I'm trying, anything, like, they execute. And I think we all want to win, like, collectively. It's very much a collective experience, but like mentally, I'm speaking more individually. I had to really get over the thing of letting a loss sort of like make me feel crappy for 3 days.
Well, sounds very similar to, I think, first of all, obviously the sporting world, but especially and including the business world. So I find that interesting because I've learned that obviously you are part of a team and it's complex and moving, everything's moving at lightning speed, and you still got to have a show produced every night. So that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I want to switch gears a little bit, so I'm a father of daughters. I have 2 adult daughters, and actually 4 grandkids. And
Wow.
both my daughters have grandchildren,
Oh,
kids. So so
congratulations. That's
um,
wonderful.
and clearly, well, surely, what's been most enjoyable to me is to be part of developing 2 unique, individuals who have found their own self and voice, and that's I didn't necessarily get that luxury growing up. Um, and so, I've read a little bit about your father. I'd like to ask you a question. Somewhere I read you said your father was the most important person in your professional life.
Hmm.
I'd like to ask you, what did he see in you?
He saw in me someone who was capable of anything. And I'll say both he and my mom. My mom passed um, in 2010, right when I had started at Global Edmonton, actually. And she had the same level of faith in me. But my parents made me feel, and my dad continues to, like nothing is out of the realm of what is possible for me. And the most illustrative example of that is when I was in Swift Current. I was really, really struggling. I was, living alone in a basement apartment, and I had a rocky relationship with the people who were employing me. Like, it was a very challenging situation, and I wanted to quit. And I had taken out a line of credit in order to be able to afford to fly home because I made such little money at the time. So I
Yeah.
flew home to see my family, and my dad my dad, who's a Greek dad, like, we're not particularly emotional or anything, or he I went out to dinner with my parents, and I said, like, I just don't know if I can do this. And he said, my dad didn't even want me to go in the first place. He wanted me to, he was so upset at the idea of me not living at home and or living in Toronto or whatever, but close by. And he said, of course you're always welcome home, but I'm going to write you a letter, and I want you to read it when you get back to Swift Current. And it was a long letter. Essentially, he had run in politics and he had lost at the start of his career. And he said, because I was struggling at the time, thinking I'm never gonna get another job. I had been refused from so many by then, and nobody wanted me in Regina or in Saskatoon or anything. And he said, I thought at the time, like, I was done in for. I would never be a success. I had failed at the first big thing I tried. And later, he's a lawyer. He said, what it actually materialized into was that all this the platform I had at the time running ended up, I met so many people that they turned into my client base, and ultimately they formed the foundation of, like, at this point now, a 55-year long career. He's still a practicing lawyer full time at 79 and his own practice. And I read that letter, and it's like, he's like, you're going to surpass this. You'll get by this. You'll surpass it. And one day you'll look back, and this will be the foundation of any success that you have. And basically, like, it was enough. And I stuck it out. And if I hadn't, and I turned back, I would have missed out on this entire wonderful career. And, like, basically ever since then, and ever since my mom passed, my dad has, be my greatest champion. He has not missed a single episode of any show I have ever been on. He knew every story in Edmonton like the back of his hand. He works to this day till 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night, would come home and watch the PVR. He knew every anchor in Edmonton. He knew every story I did on Alberta politics. He then knew everything about Ottawa, and he has never missed a single show that I've ever done. And like, I don't know if I would have had the balls to say, oh, that's the thing I want to do in 20 years, when I said at the beginning of my career, I want to host a Sunday show, unless I had the parents that I had, and that I have a dad and mom who believed that that was possible for me. Like, I'm just a product of their faith.
So, what he saw in you then, have you become the person that he saw?
I mean, I'm not always the best version of myself, but I think so. I think, and this is going to sound weird, a lot of what my dad saw in me was my mom. And my mom was like a very much more ballsy than me, sort of like, she had a really tough life, and she just like didn't dwell on negative things, and she was just tough and sort of, but had a big heart. And I think of her, I conjure her a lot when I'm like feeling like, oh God, I have to do something really uncomfortable, which is like 3 nights a week, right? Where you're just like, I know this isn't going to be pretty, but, and so I sort of think that in a way, my dad thought I was capable in the same way my mom was capable of so many things. And so I do feel capable. I do feel ballsy a lot of the time. I do, like, not in a cheesy way, but like I conjure up the way that I know she wouldn't be like afraid to call the Prime Minister and say, I want the first interview, if that makes sense. That doesn't come naturally to
Well,
me.
I understand that. It's actually a really elegant answer. I really do appreciate that. And you are, of course, I think what that is, what you've become in his vision. Clearly, I think you're probably one of the best questioners that I've seen in terms of as an anchor or a journalist. I love watching those tense moments where you're still trying to chase the answer out of somebody that seems to want to try to avoid answering the question. And I think you're very good at it.
Thank you.
You have a son now, though. What do you want him to see when he watches you work?
Well, right now, all he sees is if I'm wearing pink or not, because that's his favorite color. And
Maybe in a few years.
He gets very excited. Yeah, well, I want him to see somebody who places a lot of value in the work that they do, and who doesn't sort of think of things as 9 to 5. And that's a hard thing to reconcile, because it also means less time with him. And it also means feelings of, I don't know if guilt is the right word, but just like opportunity costs always. Like, if I were a multimillionaire, I wish I could be with him all the time. But I also have all this ambition and love of what I do. And
yeah, it doesn't seem like it's just the money. It seems
no,
obviously
it's not
like
at all.
it's the pursuit of this truth.
Yes, I love it. And I hope that he does something he loves. And I hope that for him, like, he places a lot of value in work and working hard. I think one of the best things my parents imbued in me and my sisters is the work ethic that they had, that like, I'm entitled to nothing, if that makes sense. And that, you know, whatever you're able to achieve should be on the back of your hard work, and first and foremost. And I hope he's like that through example. I hope he sees me do that, and I hope he takes from me what I took from my parents in that vein.
Well, I'm sure he will, but that was a great answer. Thank you very much. Let's talk about Canada. So you kind of enforce neutrality every day. That's kind of what I guess I see, what you watch you and what you're doing. But you're also a Canadian, raising a Canadian child.
Mm-hmm.
What do you actually think is happening to this country right now?
In what way?
Well, I guess maybe what should we all be watching for, or what shape are we taking? I guess it's to me, and I think to many people, it feels like a tumultuous time for sure, but also a realignment of certain things. And Canada's identity plays a part in that, just because of the issue with the United States. But I guess, like maybe to reword that, like you have you have a voice in being a Canadian citizen, and you have a Canadian child. Like, um, what do you think we should be worried about then?
Well, I guess I'd preface it by saying, like, I'm very proud to be Canadian. I'm very proud to be raising a Canadian child, and I'm very proud to be working in Canadian media. I love covering domestic politics and domestic issues, and I think like there cannot be enough of that. Just as you worry about sort of like the local, the derision of local investigative journalism or accountability journalism. Like, I don't want that to be the case at the national level either. I know that it's easy to be like subsumed by everything going on in the United States, right? And to sort of think those problems are so huge, like they're worthy of focus, but there's a lot of challenges in this country that are worthy of focus too. And I think when you say like what should we be worried about, I don't know if I necessarily have a clear answer to that, but I do know that I find it very interesting right now that we're sort of in this period of like trying to figure out what our identity is vis-a-vis the threat from the United States and sort of the economic war between our two countries right now. And I often find myself thinking like when that finishes, because I sort of believe, I don't know why, but at some point it will. I'm sort of not necessarily in a good or bad way, but like maybe it's 20 years, maybe whatever it is. Like what are we left with in terms of our own identity? And I think about that question a lot. I don't have an answer, but I think like there will become a moment where we're like, how do we define ourselves if not in contrast to the United States? And then as far as challenges go, like I'm sort of, I think about two things. And the first is more esoteric and it's around, but maybe relevant to your audience. And it is really
Well,
important.
I don't have a lot of audience yet, so
No,
we don't have to worry
well,
too much.
I mean people in Alberta. Insofar as like I think my experience out west has informed a lot of what I pay attention to and what I think about. And I worry about the unity of the country. And I'm not ascribing, you're wrong or you're right to any of the sides, but
Mm.
I think we always sort of feel like we're on the cusp of something in Quebec or in Alberta or in Saskatchewan. And I don't know what the solution is, but like it's definitely going to be a challenge, and it continues to be a challenge right now. And then on a more granular level, I am sort of inundated on the flip side, you know, outside of the West, but in urban centers, and in particular with knowing so many people I grew up with in Toronto, I think the idea that people in this country feel like they could have achieved the most success they would have dreamed of 20 years ago and still not be able to feel secure is a big deal. Like, I think that people who feel gainfully employed, like they've focused on their career, like they've saved money, and they still have total economic insecurity is a bigger problem than maybe is reflected in the media because it may not be represented in the media. Like I don't know necessarily why that's the case, but I just feel in my real life, I am surrounded by people my age, a little bit older and a little bit younger, who work a ton and feel like they're like, why am I
We're
not?
moving backwards.
Yeah. And it's not, and it's one thing for that to be the case. It's another for it to be so different than what you expected.
Hmm. I have some pretty strong opinions about the way that the economic system it's basically inspires inflation. The reality is it's essential, um, in the sense that the debt that the governments have on their balance sheets need to be repriced in cheaper dollars, and that and the deficits and the debt that each the Western countries, most of the countries in the world, frankly, have accumulated. Um, it hasn't gone away, and it's going to drive the cost of debt up, and that's going to drive the economy down, and that's going to possibly deflate the value of and it has, like, I mean, it has. Inflation is essentially the degradation of the value of the dollar, or at least the purchasing value of the dollar. So I think that's a fundamental problem for the world. How it gets resolved is going to be messy,
Yeah.
and what that means, like how it gets resolved between countries and how it gets resolved, in the capital markets and in the the businesses that grow, and we need to grow, and again, ultimately how it affects the average person. Like the you're right. I actually agree. I think that it probably is the biggest issue, because having studied it and really focused on it, there is no easy solution.
Right.
There's three ways for the U.S. government to deal with a $40 trillion debt load, and none of them are good. So it'll be fascinating to see how it plays out, and it's a good answer though. I would say on the identity sovereignty side, this idea. Well, at least this is my opinion. The sentiment about Canada internationally seems to have remarkably changed. And our response to the challenges that we've been faced with, the economic tariff war is a challenging issue. We'd be one of the biggest trading partners of the United States, if not the biggest, of course. So, do you feel a sentiment change in terms of how the world sees Canada?
I'm not sure I'm necessarily like best poised to answer that, just because I used to go, particularly during the Trudeau years when I was reporting on him, like we used to go cover him and his trips everywhere and spend a lot of time outside of the country. So I would be able to like ascertain what the reaction to him was better there. I can certainly see like in international media, there is a popular perception of the prime minister. I would only add this caveat that I lived through the first, year and a half of Trudeau, and I can tell you that it was Trudeau-mania around the world. Like we forget because of how much things, how different things were at the end of the 10 years. But I was actually looking at this chart the other day from Nick Nanos about preferred prime minister, and at the height of his popularity, Justin Trudeau's popularity was even a few points higher than Mark Carney's. So I say that only because having lived through that, I'm a little hesitant to sort of buy into the international media narrative. I think there is a change in perception, and for example, President Stu, I asked that about. A lot of countries are looking at our defense spending, and that is one discernible thing that has had a very different reaction around the world, in things like that. But I think it's too early to know. And I really feel like it's my job to, yes, observe, the positives, but also sort of like focus in on there's some major promises that have been made. Like the prime minister characterizes his own ambition as like the most in generations. So I'm very focused on the execution of that and holding the government to account over
Yeah,
that.
well, that is exactly what's needed. It is interesting in my role as a CEO and in the innovation sector. Parts of groups where we constantly go to Ottawa and try to inspire the government to to build Canada's innovation industry by partnering with Canada's innovation industry. But it definitely feels different in terms of the feedback I get. I got back a feedback from a deputy minister that I was meeting with in Ottawa, where he described the biggest change in his life is that, there's been this transference of you're accountable, but you're empowered, which, in government is, hard to imagine. So it'll be interesting to see. I also think that with the prime minister's business, call it outside of politics experience, that he has a unique perspective, and I fantasize that I think most politicians should have a lot of more, or at least hopefully more real world experience. And I actually quite am charmed by many, like the small market, local people that run for office that you may or may not say are even remotely qualified, but yet it's their passion that I think is inspiring, and it's their authenticity that I think is inspiring. So I'm going to watch it with interest too, and absolutely, like the promises have been large. The defense investment, the defense industrial strategy that was released by the government. Someone said to me, who's very close to the senior levels, I guess, of the bureaucracy, is that if you want to understand the vision of the prime minister and his vision for Canada, read the backgrounder that was released as part of the defense industrial strategy. And I did that. So I actually did that. And it is quite revealing, I think, of the vision for the country to be more self-sustaining and more create value more here if possible. So we'll see. It's an interesting experience. And I also expect in the Trudeau sense, this fades. It doesn't last forever, and it can't last forever, and it shouldn't last forever. So we'll see how it goes. On the Trudeau front, I have one anecdotal story. I'm on the board of the Juno Beach Center, which is at the Canada's Second World War Museum in Normandy, France, of course, on Juno Beach, and I remember seeing Prime Minister Trudeau there on one of the big anniversaries. It must have been last year, the 80th anniversary of the invasion of D-Day, and there was literally 20, 25 young people, mostly women, like like going crazy over him, like following him down the beach, trying to get pictures with him, and I found that fascinating. Like I really do find that fascinating, and so I will we'll hope for the best. That's kind of how I feel, regardless of the government, regardless of the party. I'm certainly a Edmontonian and an Albertan and a Canadian, all those things collectively together, and I cheer for them every day. And it's but watching the impact of government and the impact of leadership, particularly right now, where like literally leaders are talking constantly every day to each other about things that materially affect the future of regions of the country. It's pretty fascinating. I imagine interpersonal skills and all those things that you need at that time, it probably has a big impact on the future of the world. So when you say you'd like to be at the front row to watching history happen, I don't think you're going to be able to get up from your seat for the next little while.
It feels like that. It definitely feels like that. Yeah.
So great. Well, let's one last question, and I hope this one is not too hard to spin around too. Maybe I'm being too esoteric, but you're the interviewer. You are one of Canada's best interviewers, if not the best right now. And I think, what I'd like to ask you is, what question do you wish someone would ask you on record that nobody ever does?
So you were very kind to send me this in advance, and I've been thinking about it all day, and I can't come up with a good answer because I don't find myself interesting at all. I'm flattered that you even wanted to talk to me today. I can't think of anything that I would want somebody to ask because I feel uncomfortable talking about myself, to be honest. So
I'm sorry, is that a modesty thing, or is that a professional standard that you feel you must maintain?
I just feel uninteresting, and I don't want to bore anybody. So maybe no. I think all the questions you asked already were great. I love.
Well, yeah, that wasn't the reason. I was just genuinely curious. Like, it must be hard. Like, I'm a director style A-type personality with, if I don't get an opportunity to project my opinion in the places and rooms where I am regularly, I can't go a few minutes without it's hard. Like I start to get itchy. And
I think the one good thing about this job is you really get used to taking yourself out of it, if that makes sense. Like it becomes sort of like habit, almost. And so I'm just so used to thinking about what I want to ask and sort of how to for my own thoughts to remain out of it versus like ones that are based on analysis, if that makes sense. So that's why I don't.
Well, but Vassy, the person, the citizen, has opinions and probably would like to share them. So that was kind of maybe the basis behind the question, and you're not going to answer it, and that's okay.
Answer.
And that's okay.
I thought about it all day, and I was like, I don't know.
So you're evading the question, and that's fine. Yeah. I've seen lots of people do that on your show.
Not evading it. I'm telling you genuinely, I can't. I mean, I can think of lots of uninteresting things like, what kind of cake did you make your stepson last night? What do you like to do outside of this? All that kind of stuff, but it's really boring. I don't think anybody wants to know that.
I'm sure that's not true, but you're not answering the question, and I'll accept that as an answer. So, excellent. Well, I really do want to thank you. This has been interesting to me, and that's the goal here. That's the point, is to have interesting conversations with interesting people doing interesting things. So, Vassy, I want to say thanks.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. I appreciate the invitation in the first place, and it was just such a joy to talk to you, and I appreciate it. Thank you.
Great. Vassy Kapelos spent 20 years making sure Canadians hear the truth from the people who shaped this country. I'm glad she came to Barney's Tavern. I'm Chris LaBossiere, You can find new episodes on barneystavern.ca and all of the podcast channels.
There's a hush in the hall where the metals used to glimmer short line. Trumpet curls like a question in a glass of cheap red wine. Slow and dim, short line. The bass walks soft like it's sneaking out past curfew. Toe to toe slim.